Hello and welcome to episode 41 of Entertainment of Excellence, the podcast where we talk about films, a TV programme for once, all of it. Hi, I'm Ollie.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Ben.
And today we're talking about the 2018 TV show, The Haunting of Hill House. This will contain spoilers.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So the general gist of this TV show is that it's like split into two timelines. So you get some point, I think I worked out it was about 26 years ago. They mention one of the characters' ages. I think like Steve is 39, and then I'm guessing he's about 13 or 14 earlier. So there's like a 25-year time difference. So you follow the kids when they are kids, and then also when they are grown up. And the idea is that when they were kids at the house, their mother died under mysterious circumstances, and then in present times, their sister has just died under mysterious circumstances. So it's kind of about discovering what's going on and also just exploring the characters in general. So yeah, that's the basic idea. Do you want to get straight on with the plot, or just talk about the way that they do that style of like the two timelines and separate characters and stuff?
I mean, I guess it might be worth giving an overview first, just talking about what we think of the series as a whole, and then we can dig down into the specifics.
Yeah. So going between the two time eras, it's really obvious to tell because they look a lot different, but they are really obsessed, which is a good thing, I would argue, with like getting smooth transitions between the two. So, you know, a lot of times there'll be a scene will end with someone opening a door, and then it transitions to like them opening a door in the other time period. So they really like making those transitions smooth. Yeah. I'm sure they had a lot of fun with it. Sometimes I couldn't tell like if they were forcing them. Like I remember one is just the dad like banging on the wall, because then it changes to him knocking on the door. I remember that one. Yeah,
because I mean, I'm sure we'll come to it, but the standout point, if you're talking about this, is probably episode 6, because like that's the one where the cinematography is really cool, and I think I counted before the last 5 minutes there were a total of 5 shots or something. So they try and make it look like it's largely one continuous shot, and a lot of that is going back between the two different time periods. But I do think it's very interesting that rather than being too heavily focused on the horror aspects of it, which there is still horror in it, but it's largely based on like the drama and tension within the family itself. And I read somewhere that the 5 children are meant to sort of symbolize the 5 stages of grief. So Stephen's denial, Shirley's anger, and Theo is bargaining, Luke's depression, and Nellie's acceptance. So it's quite interesting to make the comparisons between the two time periods, and sort of obviously they're able to link them both through the, like as you were saying, the technical aspects with the how they filmed it.
Yeah,
I guess that would make sense because there are quite a lot of children, so that makes sense on the number. But Nell being a thing for acceptance is kind of weird, seeing as she, you know, ends up killing herself.
Yeah,
but
I mean, even this denial,
what are you gonna do?
Probably makes the most sense. Or Luke's depression, because
yeah,
I really like the. Well, should we just go on with like saying that the first 5 episodes, how they structure it is they each deal with one specific character and sort of
It
going
kind of
down
carries
in
on
age
like
order.
that.
Yeah, it goes
Yeah.
oldest to youngest.
Oh, I didn't realise it went from oldest to youngest.
Well, I didn't really realise that they were doing that at all until halfway through the second episode, because although the first episode is largely focused on Steve, I thought he would sort of be the protagonist throughout the whole thing. Plus, there's a bit of Shirley and Theo stuff in episode 2, in the first episode, which sort of sets up a lot of questions. So, but then as I started to realise that's what they were doing, I think especially the Luke and Nell ones were particularly stand out in the first half of the season.
Yeah, so the first 5 episodes, they sort of followed each individual character, each of the kids, and then the last 5 is sort of told from the perspective of the parents and stuff. So I think the point is that all of these children have slightly different perspectives on what happened that night, and each of them recalls it differently, and each of them sort of suffered the trauma in different ways, and the viewers sort of taken on that same journey as they try to piece together what actually happened from each person's side of the story.
Yeah, and it works especially well in this first episode, and then later in like episode, I guess 4.
Yeah,
it can't be that, I don't know, but there's like a point in this episode, it's right near the end, when Steve has gone back to his apartment, and then you see Luke leaving with like his iPad and camera, and he's basically stolen some of his stuff, and then Luke says it's not what it's looked like. So obviously, because of what you know so far, you assume Luke is using it to buy heroin. But it's only later on, like in Luke's episode, where you get to see that actually he's trying to help someone he knows get off of heroin, but he has no money to do so.
Yeah,
I think stuff like that, it does well at withholding information in an interesting way.
Yeah. Something that I especially liked was the fact that I think you see this probably the most when you have Steven's perspective, just because if he's meant to sort of encapsulate denial, then I like the relationship between him and his dad, because he's like blaming him for trying to conceal the truth, which is quite physically seen in the first episode, where on the final night, which you don't really find out much about until the last few episodes, he's like physically blinded from the truth, and that's why he's writing this book, but there's always this contempt towards him, because he's sort of glorifying it, and he's not really telling an accurate depiction of what actually happened, because he didn't actually really see it. So I really like that relationship. But then in the second, I can't remember exactly what episode it was, but you start to get more of the perspective of the parents, and especially the dad, and you sort of see their side and what motivated them, because it's quite interesting with the mum, who was trying to protect them and sort of shelter them from the outside world, but it's not necessarily something that was in their best interest.
Yeah. I think we should. So each of the children have obviously gone through trauma, and I think I'll just quickly run down sort of how they dealt with it. So Stephen wrote a book about it and sort of launched his career as a writer, basically just sort of writing up the events of Hill House as he remembered them and capitalizing off of that, which caused a rift with his family members, because they didn't like the way it was portrayed, or and a couple of them just didn't think that it should be sold, the sort of experiences they've been through. So he offered each of them publishing royalties, and only Theo ended up accepting, but then Shirley's husband accepted to keep her funeral home business afloat. But she was very adamant against taking the money, calling it blood money and stuff. So Shirley is obviously anger as the stage of grief, and she seems to be really aggressive towards, especially Stephen and Luke. You find out through flashbacks that she stopped Luke coming to Nell's wedding because he was high, and she seems to just not have any forgiveness. But equally, the flip side of that is her business is kind of failing because she feels bad for people who've died, the grieving families. And then Theo is a psychiatrist, but she's also kind of living this sort of, I guess, slightly hedonistic lifestyle where she's basically just hooking up with people, especially this one girl who...
Well, you say hooking up with people, but we only see her hook up with one person who becomes a long-term relationship.
I mean,
but Shirley does say a line like saying, "You're worse than a frat boy" or something like that.
Yeah, there's that implication. And then Luke obviously is just an addict. He's really affected by this and sort of turns to a life of drugs, and it's hard for him to escape that cycle. And then Nell just kind of wants to be heard and tries to talk to each of her family members, but because of their own like fractured lives, there's loads of tension between them. So she often asks unrealistic things, or like she did with Theo, like acts out and interrupted one of Stephen's book events, and you can really see from each of these characters' perspectives that they're suffering, and none of these things are like meant with an ill heart, but it's just the conflict between each of them. It's just sort of fracturing the family relationship, and all of them kind of resent the father for keeping stuff from them, keeping the true events of the night, of what actually happened on the final night from them, especially Stephen. She later finds is for good reason, because he was trying to protect the image of the mother in their eyes. I think it's kind of fitting that the series ends with Stephen being the only one who knows the full truth, and sort of knows how things actually ended, with like the father sacrificing himself to let them all leave the Red Room. But yeah, should we just give a quick rundown of the plot in each episode? I feel like that's kind of needed at this point.
So I mean, episode 1 is basically just setting everything up. Like, you see Stephen. I remember I enjoyed the cinematography of the bit of him interviewing the woman for his new book, where it just kind of stays on the phone recording for ages. I liked that. But that basically follows Stephen. He finds out Nell's died. Episode 2, you follow Shirley, and it kind of shows about like how death was quite traumatic for her with these kittens. But also you find out why she gets into becoming a funeral director, because of when it was their mum's funeral, the director there, that was an open casket one, and he'd kind of fixed her, as they say, and put makeup on and make them look better than a dead body. And it kind of helps to preserve that image. I think that's mainly... Is that the main takeaway from episode 2?
Yeah, I guess. It's just that at the very end of episode 1, it's revealed that Nell has killed herself.
Yeah.
And Stephen sees her ghost, and that's the episode title. Stephen sees a ghost.
Yeah, and Shirley, also in episode 2, decides to do like the funeral for Nell and herself.
Yeah, which everyone's like, isn't that a bit much? But she, sort of her coping mechanism.
Episode 3 then follows Theo, who you find out has this kind of like psychic ability where if she touches someone, she can like feel their feelings or stuff that's going to happen. It's not explicitly explained, but it's some kind of psychic ability, which is why she wears gloves all the time. And she basically uses that to be a child therapist. And in the episode, she actually saves a child from sexual abuse by like using those powers.
I think they did that in like quite a nuanced way, I thought, and it was really effective with like the Mr. Smiley thing and sort of her being able to sympathise with the situation she's in. But also in this episode, they did some quite interesting flashbacks to, as I was saying before, with the parents trying to cover up the actual state of the house, partly because they don't understand it themselves. But when Nell, I think it no, when I think it's Theo and Luke find the basement, and he goes down into the basement, and then they're trying to sort of cover it up and say, "Oh, there is no basement," and that's also shown with his recurring visions of. She's called Abigail.
Yeah.
Who it's sort of set up throughout the most of the series. You presume she's a ghost, but then there's kind of a bit of a twist that I'm sure we'll come on to.
Yeah. So after Theo's episode, we go on to Luke's, who's been mainly absent to this point. You've only seen like the brief. Well, you've seen flashbacks of him, but you've only seen the adult version of him really stealing from Steven's apartment. It turns out he's been going through this program to like treat his addiction, and he's reached a 90-day clean milestone. And he has a close friend who maybe there's a bit of like romantic tones sort of implied, but really it's just his close friend who's got him through his addiction, who's been clean for a lot longer than he has. And she ends up relapsing, running away and relapsing, and he goes after her, and the program won't have him back. So he goes to Steven's apartment to try and get her some stuff, get her into a hotel room, and basically she runs off and he can't find her anymore. And all of this time he's been feeling really cold and stiff, which it's revealed that he has a sort of connection with Nell because they were twins, and he's having a physical reaction to her death, which I found quite interesting. So like all his life he's felt her pain, and it ends with Steven telling him about her suicide, and he's adamant that no, she did not kill herself. It's like the house or something. I can't remember the exact lines. And then we get on to I like. Wait, I'll just say quickly. In that episode, I liked the flashbacks to the ghosts and stuff. So there was. I'm pretty sure it was that episode where he was hiding under his bed from a ghost that entered his room, in a really tall one in like a bowler hat, that hovered and reappeared when he was older, and he has this thing where he counts to 7 because 7 members of his household to keep him grounded.
That's another example of a lot of times they'll show a character doing something that isn't explained. So I think it's in it must be episode 1 because it's in the treehouse, which only Steven can see, as we find out later, where he's counting to 7 and then that comes back and you find that's explained. And it's like even that happens within the Mr. Smiley bit, like with Theo when she's gone into the basement and she lies on the couch and then seems to get like really panicked and terrified, and you have no idea why, and it's only later that you find out because that's she's realised that's where the abuse is happening.
Yeah. I mean, the shot you were mentioning with the tall ghost, I think that was like really palpable, just because like the cinematography was really cool, like following him under the bed, but it did this thing quite a lot in this series where it would sort of set up a jump scare but then not necessarily fulfill it, so it kind of subverted your expectations, and it sort of went against the typical horror trope of loads of jump scares that you see in things, which can be a bit cliche.
Yeah.
I also thought
it did it a lot, like working with the cinematography and using kind of empty spaces. So a lot of times you'll be looking over a character's shoulder at a dark corridor that's not in focus, and it's panning round, and you just assume there's going to be something there, and that's actually, it's just more the paranoia that it does really well at.
But equally,
Yeah, because
there's a lot of ghosts sort of as Easter eggs sort of hidden throughout some of the
that's what I was
shots.
gonna say.
Yeah, like
I watched a video going through them all, and I only noticed about 2, but I feel like that sort of, it's a really subtle way of making it way more creepy rather than having to be really obnoxious and in your face.
There was one with the mum where there was one, like, a ghost just in the window, like, ages. And I was like, what? Come on. I wasn't ever noticed that. I can't tell if that one I sent you two like a video from when I watched it where it's panning past a doorway, and then it's really difficult to tell, but I swear that there's a ghost there, and but I'm not sure. It could literally just be a statue.
In some episodes there must be about 10. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, but then there was another. But then, like, I watched a video going into a lot of detail about the series, and there was Mike Flanagan, the creator, in one of his interviews had mentioned that like a lot of the stuff in the household like purposefully had faces on it, so like the doorknobs and statues and stuff, and I think it was to sort of build that paranoia that something's watching and the house has its own consciousness. I can't remember the exact quote, but I just thought that was really interesting directorial choice.
Yeah, because also linking back to the ghosts, when you have the person fixing the clock, you initially just see that as something quite innocuous, just someone standing there with all the people working on the house, but then you later find out that clock hadn't been fixed in however long, so it's sort of like a bit of a shock that genuinely feels really earned rather than just being really out of the blue and designed to just have like a sudden reaction.
Unless you're me, who didn't notice the guy there before. So it only really worked on later ones. And yeah, and I'm pretty sure that what I saw was a ghost from like the one extremely show. That's a distinct leg. We're going to assume it's not just a crew member left in shot.
No. Okay.
We are going to assume that these are intentional ghosts that like the.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it's not a real ghost.
Yeah. I also, just going back to episode 4, I felt that this one worked really well just by itself in isolation, because it had like obviously it explained things that had been set up in earlier episodes, and it did the thing with the flashbacks, but it almost felt like it had a cyclical structure, because at the start you have that really impactful scene with that the soldier talking about how he blinded himself to try and trying to forget about the atrocities of war that have sort of been haunting him, but now he can permanently see it, and that sort of links to Luke, who is using the drugs as a coping mechanism to suppress these ghosts that he keeps on seeing. But then when he is ultimately sober, he sees his mum, which is almost he confronts the tall ghost with the hat, which is originally giving to him to it's like a big boy hat or something, but he also has like a genuine heartfelt moment with his mum, which and he also gives like a speech to the people in the place that he goes, which he's initially quite hostile towards her. I feel like this episode in itself, there's a lot of really interesting character development with Luke, which I wasn't necessarily a big fan of what they did with Luke in the second half of the season, because it felt like he sort of just went off and did his own thing, and he wasn't really dealt with much.
Yeah, I really agreed with that. That's one of the few criticisms I have of the show. Let's just like moving on. Episode 5 was Nell's episode, and this is where the story really starts to become a bit more coherent. You find out that she's been haunted her whole life by this vision of a bent neck lady, so this ghost that appeared by her bed, and has been haunting her ever since. Even through, so she had to go through therapy to be able to properly sleep, and she ends up marrying her therapist, a sleep doctor. I can't remember what it was called, but something Vance. Tom, you sent me this on the group chat. Whenever the word Vance was mentioned, like my first thought was just Bob Vance of Vance Refrigeration from The Office. But no, I like this episode, and by the time it had finished, you see why Nell's gone back to the house, because she's become haunted by this ghost again, and she's trying to reach out to all of her family members. None of them, like, they're all caught up in their own trauma and their own issues and can't really deal with her. And her new therapist gives this weird suggestion that she has to go back to Hill House and face her fears. So she goes back to the house, and we get this sort of dream sequence where she gets sort of exactly what she wants. Like her husband, who had died earlier from an aneurysm, is there. All of her family members are there. They are all apologizing for what they've done wrong. And she goes dancing with her husband and finds her mum, who gives her this necklace that she was promised earlier on. But then it turns out that in real life, that's the rope that she hangs herself with. And we get this like terrifying 2-minute sequence where she's dropping down through all of the scenes you've seen with the bent neck lady so far, and it's revealed that she was haunted by like her future death and what she'll become. What did you guys think of that? Because I kind of saw it coming towards the end, but I still thought it was really impactful and really like good, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I mean, I also definitely saw that like twist coming.
Yeah.
But I mean, it couldn't really have gone any other way. So, it makes sense. And I just remember that episode has the jump scare that got me the second most. The bit in the corridor.
Oh,
when
yeah.
the bent neck lady just like drops down, because you're like, oh, there's no way that anything could appear here. You're like, okay.
I love the cinematography of and the special effects when they would drop when she hung herself, the camera follows her falling and sort of dropping down through all of these scenes, so you like see it from her perspective dropping down in that corridor, and I really like that.
Yeah, I also liked these past 2 episodes. I felt that in the first 3, it had shown Luke as being like this really, it had a really hostile depiction of Luke, and then Nell was, they obviously something that motivated her in returning to Hill House was sort of that she was being rejected of any help from her own family, and it seemed like the only person that really cared was her dad when she rings at the end.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that this deals with her perspective, and it sort of explains a lot of the because obviously you don't see the part where she goes to Stephen's book signing until this episode, but it should, I don't know, it just kind of felt like it was quite a simplified portrayal of her before now, but you're really able to feel a great deal of pathos in this episode.
Yeah. So next is episode 6, which personally I think was the best episode.
Yeah, it's my favorite as well.
And all that really happens in the story during this is the family members arrive one by one to Nell's funeral, and to sort of see the open casket. And there's a storm, and it follows, as Ollie said earlier, it's only about 5 shots for the bulk of the episode, where the camera will just like move from one room into a Hill House, so the funeral home into Hill House, and the transitions are flawless. And what's going on simultaneously is there's a storm, the children are scared, and Nell disappears, and the parents go looking for her, and they end up finding her, and she's terrified, and it's like, I was right here and none of you could see me, which I love the sort of reflection of that with her ghost that sort of appears in the background for some of the funeral scenes.
Oh yeah, that in this episode there was a lot of like Nell's ghost just hanging around.
But then there's stuff like the family bickering and arguing and blaming each other. And it's hard, I guess. This is mostly a drama episode, but
yeah, I really like all the drama.
So did I.
And I think it does the horror really well though, because it's got the good old power going out, and that happens in both sides or both time periods, because obviously they've got to all use torches in that storm, and so it has a lot of darkness and not being able to see much, and everyone feels on edge. And it's that kind of like the use of the really long shots means that there's no break between the conflict. Like you have to sit through it all, and it really increases the impact, because at this point you've seen all the kids, so you understand each of their problems with each other. So it's you get all of the arguments that are being had, and it's kind of like infuriating that they can't get along, but it also makes sense. All the tension, and I assume that the whole thing of like the 2 storms. Well, there are 2 storms, but is the argument the storm? Ooh, deep.
One of the things I really did like though was some of the horror-y stuff in that episode. Sort of seemed like it was Nell's ghost interacting with them. So when they were really bickering, when they were really going at it, and getting angry at each other, the casket falls.
Yeah.
And everyone just stops, and Shirley just goes to fix her, and it felt like that was just Nell telling them to stop. But I really loved the way that the characters were fleshed out in this episode. Like, especially with like, I think this is the first time that like Stephen like shows a bit of a breakdown, a bit of emotion, because he can't really look at Nell that well. He just looks at her and sort of goes off, talking a lot, and you find out that, was it this episode where it's revealed that Shirley's husband took Stephen's money.
Yeah, it's this episode.
Yeah.
And all of these relationships sort of just become fractured and just good. It is good.
Good. And yeah, because there's the whole thing with Theo and the husband.
I think that's...
You later find out is projection. Damn.
Is that not episode 7?
That's episode 7.
No, that's episode 6. It's right. I thought it was right at the end of episode 6 they get caught in the cupboard.
I thought it was episode 7 because
No,
because
it
the
was.
power was off.
It was 6.
The power was off.
Yeah, it was 6
Yeah.
because the 7th episode is following the dad's perspective, and he's just sort of going around each of his kids and just trying to talk to them, and he approaches Theo, and she's like, "You know when you've really messed up." Yeah.
Oh yeah. But yeah, this episode was probably my favorite episode.
Yeah, just a fun fact. So the camera that this was used to film with, you had this stand that would like wheel around and not make much noise. Except it wasn't designed for carpets, and there was some carpets obviously on the set. And they'd locked down the production of the TV show for like a month just to rehearse this one episode. And by the time they'd done a few takes, the like wheels on the stand were starting to wear out, and the camera could just fall off and break. The stand could break, and the shots would just be ruined, and they couldn't get another one of them. So what they did was they chose not to tell the actors in case it affected their performance. And then right after the take you see in the episode, the stand breaks. So,
damn,
was it interference from beyond the grave?
Ooh, so spooky.
Anyway, so episode 7's from the dad's perspective, but infuriatingly, not yet do you get to see exactly what happens. So up to this point, most of the sort of anger from the kids towards the dad you sort of feel is justified because he's just not told them anything, and they're having to suffer because of that. And this one starts to really sort of, well, not the younger dad. The younger dad's, you can see, is just trying his best, but this starts to really humanize the older dad, and you start to get glimpses of why he's protecting them and not telling everything that's going on. Oh yeah, just a side note: the younger dad was played by the kid from E.T. What?
Yeah.
I was surprised that he had a career past being a child actor.
That's crazy.
It's his eyes. There's something.
I need to rewatch E.T.
He actually
to see
has
if he's
brown eyes.
dead eyes.
The reason that they look fake is because he'll have contact lenses on to make them the same color as the older dads.
They did a really good job of making the older dad look like an older version of the younger dad.
I know, it was uncanny.
Yeah.
Maybe they just aged the actor.
But I really like that. I don't. This might be in episode 8, but I really like that thing of Stephen blaming it on like a hereditary thing rather than. So it's like something that he's trying to avoid because he's saying it's in the blood, and it's really interesting that it's dealing with like natural horror elements, I guess you could say. And the fact that Stephen himself doesn't really believe in supernatural, he just sort of believes in stuff that we yet don't understand. So obviously you see the horror of Luke's addiction and Nell's sort of sleep paralysis, and I guess you could say there's elements of like how the other characters deal with it. So Shirley sort of obstinate in her ways, and Theo is, she's presented as being quite angry and blaming other people. So I think it's really interesting seeing the perspective of the dads, because it kind of reminded me of the Shining parts of this, and I know that the creator of this show was actually involved in, I think he wrote and directed the film adaptation of Doctor Sleep, which was the sequel to The Shining. That also was quite similar to this, because in that Danny sort of has to go back and confront his past by returning to the Overlook Hotel, and it's that idea that it isn't. It's sort of a combination of the inherited problems that Stephen believes in, but also the actual physical house itself and the effects that it has on, uh, well, the mum especially, and also Nell, which you see later on with um, sort of the mum having to have a break from Hill House.
Yeah. I really like the scene where Nell had literally just been buried, um, and Luke goes up and sees a ghost of Nell and a ghost of his mum, and it's like startled and reacts, and Stephen comes over and he goes, just hang on there, just uh, you're mentally ill as well. We're all mentally ill. It runs in the family. Um, and I don't want to bury you too, which uh, I just really like the fact that kind of really humanizes Stephen, that he, his relationships with his siblings are all messed up, but he does really care about them, and especially it seems to be especially Luke. And he doesn't want to deal with the impact of a third suicide in the family. Which, he blames on mental illness, which to a degree maybe that as an interpretation that's how the whole story is played out, but I just really like that, you know.
Yeah, and also the fact that the dad is kind of portrayed as ignorant and trying to move away from his past, whereas in reality he also sees visions of his wife, and um, he's clearly scarred by what's happened equally, as
Well,
well as the children.
his coping mechanism seems to be just imagining his wife and sort of talking to her to keep her alive in his mind. So you
Yeah,
see, that's again another example of, like, in earlier episodes, it's set up that he'll just like absentmindedly talk to himself, and then in episode 7 it's revealed that he's talking to his own vision of his wife.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I'll probably say overall, apart from, I did really like the cathartic moment with Luke's speech when it's linked to that um the I think it's the episode 4, the Luke one, that's called the twin thing, and he's sort of talking about how they've always had those connections, and that's why you see him having that physical reaction when she dies. But apart from that, I'd probably say this was one of my least favorite episodes, just because it had to deal with following episode 6, and I wasn't a huge fan of like the mold storyline in the house. But I guess it was sort of a physical representation of, I guess, corruption or the horror, the psychological damage kind of, but it just didn't
Yeah.
really work that well for me.
Yeah, I think it has the problem of dealing with the like episodes 1 to 5 felt like a run up and then big climax. Then episode 6 managed to do another climax. Like, it was practically a miracle that managed to top the previous episode. So then it kind of has to bring the show back down. It's like, yeah, we've got 4 more episodes. We can't keep doing this.
Yeah.
So I think that was the main problem, was the way that the show feels to peak in the middle. I don't know. It's quite strange.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So episode 8, I actually can't remember exactly what happens in this one, because I'm great and haven't made
this
notes.
it's called Witness Marks. It's the one where they discover the clock thing. So
It's where a lot of it in cars.
In cars.
Where there's the dad in the car with.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, they're looking for Luke and
Shirley and Theo are in the car as well.
And it's revealed.
It's Halloween, yeah, because Shirley.
Oh yeah.
He's hearing someone knock on the door.
Yeah. It's revealed in this episode a bit more about what's happened. With like.
Is this the one where you find out that Shirley had an affair, or is that
that's the last episode?
That was the last episode, but it was I think it was this one where she explains it, where she'd gone to touch Nell in the funeral parlor because she has this psychic ability, and she just felt this like overwhelming emptiness, and she just had to grasp onto something, and it turned out that Shirley's husband was just there, and it depends on how much you want to sympathize with Theo's character as to how much you believe that. Like her reasoning was probably sound. It's whether like she actually did stuff with them or not. But it certainly seems to be good enough for Shirley, who is like absolutely furious with her, but by the end of the episode is just sort of like taking her hand and leading her back in the car, because they found out that Luke's gone back to Hill House. So this is just the family traveling there to sort of stop him, because it's the most dangerous place for him, according to the dad.
Yeah. This is also the one where, with the flashbacks, you get the one where Steve makes the paints the mirror for his mum, and then she just smashes it. And then obviously that's something that's explained in the next episode, where you see her having visions of the older versions of the twins. But this episode was all right, but I just feel like it would have been quite nice to get a bit more of a perspective of Luke after the funeral, because you see him, I think at the end, is at the end of this episode where he's burning the house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just sort of feel like he was largely forgotten about, which was a bit of a shame.
Yeah, definitely. So now we're getting there. We get to episode 9, Screaming Mimes. This is the mum Olivia's episode. And you see things from her perspective for the first time. So she started to see like this ghost of the previous resident, Poppy Hill, who was like mentally ill. Oh, that rhymes. It's a joke. But basically, she ends up convincing Olivia that the only way to sort of keep her kids safe is to kill them, essentially, and from safe from the wide world out there, and it's revealed exactly what happens on that night, finally, in this episode. So, Olivia's been like acting erratically lately, and Hugh, the dad, had said, "Go leave the house, go have a break," but she comes straight back after she leaves, goes up to the red room, which is this room with a red door that's been locked, this whole time. And it's been opened for the first time. Ooh. She has a tea party with Nell and Luke, and Luke's imaginary friend Abigail. And she laces the teas with rat poison to try and kill them. She doesn't get to killing Nell and Luke, but she does kill Abigail, and it's revealed that Abigail is actually not imaginary, that she's the daughter of the housekeepers, the Dudleys. And Hugh finds out that she's here, is terrified for the kids, like slams her against a wall to try and get them away from the kids, and puts all the kids in the car and drives them away. Which, up to this point, you've been feeling like that was unreasonable, and maybe like suspicious of his motives, but it's finally in this episode you see the whole picture, and you realize that that's actually the best course of action he could have done. And then losing his kids in a custody battle afterwards was kind of just tragic. And the mother ends up killing herself.
Yeah. Are we on episode 10 here or episode 9?
9.
I thought that you found out about Abigail being the daughter in episode 10.
Yeah, that's episode 10.
Oh,
but
you find out she's the daughter, but it's revealed that she's real in this episode because she physically dies.
Oh yeah. Which I kind of knew that she'd be their daughter because they kept going on about a daughter that, you know, lived in the house near the woods and they never let her near the house and everything. And I'm like, it's their daughter. Because
Yeah.
Luke keeps saying she lives in the wood. Come on.
A bit of a general criticism I have of this show. I mean, it's not major, but I think it was most prominent in the last 2 episodes. Is I'd quite like to see more explored of Poppy Hill, because I don't really think she was mentioned until, I think it might have been the one before this, episode 8 by Mrs. Dudley, and she was almost like the manifestation of the house itself and this psychological damage that it inflicts. So I'd quite like to see. I think it's good that it shows it from the perspective of the mum for the first time, but she actually plays quite a key role in the last episode, with like where you start to get quite a bit of the backstory of the characters, which we'll talk about in the finale. But I don't really know how they could have done it, but I feel like it would have been quite nice if she was a bit more. I guess maybe throughout the show.
Yeah, I was going to say either expand or just take her out, because it was kind of a weird addition. It was like they wanted, they wanted to have the mother to have tried to kill her children, but they also didn't want the blame to rest entirely on her.
Yeah.
So they were like, just fucking some random ghost. Yeah.
It felt like she was kind of just squeezed in to be the manifestation of the house at the last minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so finally, episode 10. So like at the end of episode 9, all of the kids had arrived at the house, and ended up trapped in the Red Room, where they find Luke. And it's revealed that the Red Room, this mysterious room, is never been opened and unable to be opened. Has actually been in their lives this whole time, and just different manifestations. So, like for Stephen, it was like Luke's treehouse. For Theo, it was a dance studio. For for Nell, it was, I can't remember what it was, but it had.
Well, I think for Stephen, it was actually the room where he found the mirror. So I think.
Yeah.
I think I'm right in saying that Stephen was the only one that's shown in somebody else's Red Room, because he was in Luke's.
Yeah.
Whereas everyone else, I mean, I feel like it was a big reveal on varying degrees, because like the treehouse one, you're like, oh, whoa, that's quite a, that was quite a big thing that featured in it early on. But like, I can't even really remember the one for Nell or Shirley. So,
I mean, the treehouse, I just found, I might just be because I'm stupid, but I really like the reveal that like, well, they were only there for like 6 weeks. How could they have possibly like made a whole treehouse?
Yeah, it was like the thing with the porch light. I thought it's in like episode 1 that they talk about how when the porch light flashes twice, you need to come home. So I assumed that the kids were going to be like, miss the porch light and be left out in the dark. And then it didn't happen. I was like, did they just forget about that? But it's actually in episode 5 when Nell arrives at the house that the porch light flashes twice, and you're like, oh, there's the thing about calling them back home. Yeah, and this episode, it makes sense because I think they say something about the dad building a treehouse, and I was like, why would he build? I thought that they weren't staying here for a while. Yeah. Why would he do that? And then it was revealed that actually he didn't.
Yeah,
so
I quite like
it. It's like, oh, you think it's badly written? Wrong, you fool.
I mean, it made for quite a good reveal when, I think it's episode 8, the one where the dad reveals to Stephen that there wasn't a treehouse, but then at the same time, as you were saying, you're like, well, I didn't really expect there to be one, because why would he build a treehouse if they're there for that long?
And then the fact that all of these places are the Red Room with the same square window, which maybe if you were really, really eagle-eyed, you'd have spotted, but unfortunately I'm not, so it was a great reveal. And then it kind of ends with, so each of the kids has their own like vision. So, for example, Shirley has a vision of when a couple of years ago she cheated on her husband. Hypocritical.
Well, it was projection, Ben, because she was told up about what she'd done.
But then out of all of these, Nell appears and sort of saves them. And Luke especially has seen that he's like injected himself with rat poison, like heroin style. And he's on the brink of death, and his vision is having the tea party with Abigail and Nell and his mother, but Nell whisks him out of there, and once they're all out, Nell appears and has this speech about how time is non-linear, and how all of it kind of pieces together why the story has been told in like a flashback, like two timelines going simultaneously. It kind of makes sense because that's how Nell's been experiencing it, because time isn't linear. And she says some final words to everyone, and sort of makes amends, and then the dad saves them by essentially just sacrificing himself to stay with his wife. And yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, because there's like a parallel there between him wanting to stay with his wife and when Abigail dies, the Dudleys say, "Oh, you have to make a promise not to destroy the house. We get to stay here with her, even if it's just her ghost." But what was I going to say? I like the point where each of them are with Nell, and they're trying to sort of seek forgiveness for these things they did with sort of not answering her calls and casting her out of their lives. And I guess that kind of justifies the optimistic ending at the end, but at the same time, there's almost a degree of hypocrisy there as well, because that's kind of one of the reasons they were so angry at the dad, but like they're almost presented as being able to immediately move on. And I did actually like the ending, with Theo gets rid of the gloves, and do you actually see Stephen's wife? Is she pregnant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, at the very end, I don't know. I think at the very end he
remember.
just No, because at the very end, no, ignore me again. I'm being stupid. Because at the end, all of the characters, so obviously each of their relationships with like their partners has been fractured. So, but they try to mend them. So I was thinking of like he goes to his wife and apologizes and says he's going to try and be better, and like Shirley admits to her husband that she's also like cheated on him, and it's a really optimistic ending. But there was going to originally be, so do you know that shot at the end where they've celebrated like 2 years of Luke being clean?
Yeah.
You can clearly see in that shot where they were going to put the Red Room's like window in the back, to sort of make it more, ooh, are they still trapped in the Red Room? To be honest, I'm kind of glad they didn't.
Yeah, I actually really like this episode. It doesn't have as high ratings as some of the past few, but I think it's the best episode of the final 4.
I'd say it's the second best of the season after episode 6, just because of the sort of emotional climax of it.
I think episode 5 was better than this one, but actually, I don't know. I'm undecided. It's been a while since I've seen them now, but yeah, I did really like the ending and the kind of optimistic feel, because that was being reflected in the soundtrack a lot, where it would have this kind of like spooky melody, but then it would have a major upturn in it quite a lot. So a lot of times the soundtrack kind of reflected this hopeful tone, and what's the reason? And I think it's because the whole show is about dealing with some kind of trauma or grief, and it's Hill House is just a manifestation of trauma, but it's because it's also about overcoming that I think that's what the whole hope is about, and that's the ending. Is that it's a bit weird that the dad dies, but the ending is them kind of learning to deal with the trauma, and it doesn't need to destroy them, and they can understand their differences, come together with Luke and all of this stuff. So I did like the ending and the music to go with it as well.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say this because we've actually been going for a whole hour now.
I know.
I'll just quickly mention, I really like the music here. It's one of the few things we've done where I'm going to say it's more than serviceable. Like, it had very clear leitmotifs. Like, I think there was one which I originally thought was to represent the house, but I think it was actually to represent the sort of family, the familial bonds that should be there. The little piano melody that I really liked. And then just one last thing, which is comparing this to its sort of sequel, The Haunting of Bly Manor, which this is they're by the same director, and there's a lot of overlap in sort of the directorial choices and the cinematography and stuff. But in terms of the writing, they're very different. This is a lot more, I suppose, artsy and atmospheric, and based on sort of the relationships between, not so much the relationships between the characters, but the trauma they've went through, whereas Bly Manor is a lot more character driven, less sort of artsy, and more, I guess, more of a drama than this was. But they're both good shows in their respective ways. If you like, go on.
Review saying like I had really high expectations after seeing this, but then it turned out to just it's like drop the horror and just emphasize on the characters. But I felt like that was sort of the point in this. The horror was secondary to the dynamics within the family and those tensions created, and that's what really compelled me in this. But I would definitely be interested in checking out Bly Manor.
Yeah. And then he's not doing a sort of third Haunting season, but he is doing another show at some point. So I'm Mike Flanagan, that is. So I'd definitely love to check out some of his other work.
It's probably worth mentioning quickly that this is based on a pretty famous book, and apparently in the novel there's only Eleanor, Theo and Luke, so they just created Stephen, just entirely made it up for the show, and then Shirley is also a creation for the show, but she's named after the author of the novel, Shirley Jackson. So it does sound like there's quite a few differences, but
that is a surprise that I could see Stephen being put in later. I guess it would be weird to have your own book within your book.
Equally, but, he's sort of
Shirley seems really integral to a lot of the stuff.
Yeah, and that's again sort of different. Where Bly Manor's based on The Turn of the Screw by Henry James, which is it's still a very liberal adaptation of it, but I'd say that Bly Manor has a lot more in common with the book than Hill House does.
Yeah.
One thing, because I just want to mention, like, one more of the technical aspects is that I've always had a thing of, like, films and TV shows where they want to have a silence, but kind of like an enveloping silence. And the way that Hill House does this to, like, enhance the horror is that it'll have a lot of really deep, low, like, rumbling noises.
Yeah.
So that it's never fully quiet, but in a sense it just makes it feel like silence is enveloping, even though it's not silent. I thought that was really effective, and also helps when at one point the mother says that one of the kids described the house as loud when they first asked them about it. So it also goes with that, like, it's just that feeling of like never being alone, and also helping to enhance the horror with that. So I liked all the deep rumbling noises.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so much more to say, but we've going to be boring people out of our minds if we stay on much longer. This is already looking to be one of our longest episodes, apart from the episode 25 special, which in 9 episodes' time, we might have something similar for you. This will be our 50th episode.
Should we try and give it a rating then?
Yeah. So
all the TV shows we've done.
This is the 4th TV show we've done. It's ridiculous. So much for film, TV, all of it, guys. So, well, off the bat, I think it's higher than an 8, purely because I like the atmosphere, the way it uses horror as sort of a background to the sort of drama that between the characters. Trying to decide if I like it more than like Truman, the Truman Show. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as like Blade Runner, although it's really hard to compare. I gave I Think of Ending Things 8.1. What did I give Room? An 8.0. I'm gonna go with 8.1 for this.
Damn.
I definitely think it's difficult, this, because there's a natural bias towards a great TV show compared to a great movie, just because you're able to do a lot more in 10 hours than 2. But at the same time, it is difficult to be consistent in those 10 hours. And there's definitely, standout episodes, but there wasn't like an episode that I hated or anything like that. And I feel like the story was quite unique for what it was, and the way it approached the horror and all the technical aspects, the cinematography, the soundtrack, as we were mentioning, was really engaging. So I'm going to give it an 8.2.
Oh, that's so much higher than me. I think you're being a bit unreasonable there.
Well, I think that I enjoyed this about as much as Marriage Story, so I'm going to give it an 8. There, I'm a lot quicker.
Oh, did we just get a solid, like, round decimal, non-recurring?
You did?
0.0.
We got a 7.25.
Yeah, so
really? That's
8.1.
Top 5?
Damn. It's also, is it a top TV show? I'll have to scroll through the list of all the other TV shows we've done. Cool. So, quickly run through. We have a submission spotlight, which is a section where we'll review your work of media. So if you've done a short film, a story, some music, whatever, you can contact us and send it in. Yeah, I mean, I know Tom probably won't remember that, because he'd be speeding onto the recommendations, which I think we should leave for this week.
Yeah.
Or I could just say the film that I liked.
Say the title and nothing else.
The Wolf of Wall Street.
Good. Thank
Shall
you,
I go?
Tom. Oh, go.
Wait. I just want to say
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Wow.
There you go.
Wait, I just want to clarify. I like
one.
The Wolf of Wall Street because it says greed bad. I don't like Jordan Belfort. I'm not weird.
Okay, I've got one too. The Mask.
Oh. Okay.
Very
interesting.
In the exact same genre as Hill House, obviously, and to keep the theme of horror. Given we don't have another link, you'll be horrified at how good the film will be doing next week is the sequel to Shark Boy and Lava Girl, We Can Be Heroes.
Yes.
Let's go.
So tune in next week for that. And then hopefully after that we'll be doing some more TV shows, and you can find out in advance if you go to entertainmentofexcellence.weebly.com and sign up for our mailing list, where we'll give you the schedule and access to the next few episodes, so you can watch the films and stuff in advance. So that is cool. Also the recommendations master list, so you can see all of our recommendations. With that, go and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at EOV Podcast, and I'm done talking, so alright, see ya.
Alright, see ya.
See ya.
Yeah, that's it.